We have this lady, Julia Brown. Julia Brown's interesting. See the book called I Testify. It's hard to find because they don't want you to read it. But I've written about Miss Julia Brown in my book, The End of Tolerance. I'm going to read to you what I wrote about what Julia Brown said. That's what I wrote. Since the writing of my last book, Crime, Inc., I have discovered and become acquainted with the life of, and writings of Miss Julia Brown. In her book, I Testify, my years as an FBI undercover agent. Julia Brown, a black woman, records her testimony before the House Committee on Un-American Activities in Washington, D.C. on June 4th, 1962. Her testimony recorded how she was a disaffected member of the Communist Party, turned double agent and infiltrated the civil rights community as an undercover FBI agent. She then discovered how the communists were using the civil rights movement and black disenchantment to subvert the government of the United States.
For 9 years, I was a member of the Communist Party, serving as an undercover agent for the FBI. During that time, I learned that the communist conspiracy had been planning and working for years to bring violent revolution to America. It was to be a communist revolution, but the great majority of the American people would not be allowed to realize that until it had already happened. If all goes according to the communist blueprint, Americans will believe that the chaos and violence has something to do with civil rights. Our enemies were quick to find our weakest point for their attack. They knew that racial differences could provide them with an excellent wedge to divide our people. Their strategy simply has been to keep hammering on that wedge, to drive it deeper into our social structure, to open all wounds that have long since healed, and deliberately to create new ones wherever they can. Now, this doesn't mean that there isn't a legitimate need for the advancement of civil rights for many of our Negro citizens. Of course, there is a need there. Otherwise, communist agitators posing as civil rights leaders could never hope to enlist massive support for their schemes. The aspirations of Negroes for full equality were not created by communists, but they are used by communists in such a way that idealistic Americans of all races can be tricked into implementing the communist blueprint for revolution. Having been on the inside of the Communist Party, it's easy for me to recognize this revolutionary agitation in disguise. But the average American finds it's hard to believe that something as worthy and noble sounding as a civil rights movement could possibly be a communist maneuver.
More than anything, she discovered that the support for Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement came from communist enemies here in America and in Moscow, Russia. Later in her life, trying to stave off the communist propaganda machine, placing sainthood on King after his death, Ms. Brown produced a pamphlet. In her pamphlet entitled, "Please Don't Help Glorify Martin Luther King," Julia Brown records what she learned about King. Through undercover activities, she confirmed all of my suspicions about King. Here are the highlights. So this woman is an undercover FBI agent for the CIA. For the FBI in the Communist Party. You know, they always would tell you that the FBI didn't have any black agents, right? Yeah. Tell that to Miss Julia Brown. This is what Julia Brown says. Miss Julia Brown spent 9 years as a member of the Communist Party. She says, Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, once called Martin Luther King Jr. the most notorious liar in the country. She said, I agree with him. But I also believe that MLK was one of the worst enemies my people ever had. Listen now. She said, but I also believe that MLK was one of the worst enemies my people ever had. I learned many surprising things while serving in the Communist Party for the FBI. Communist leaders told us about the demonstrations that would be started and the protest marches. The demand would be made for massive federal intervention. Every communist was ordered to help convince American Negroes that we are no better than slaves. We were also told to promote MLK, to unite Negroes and whites behind him and to turn him into some sort of national hero. And she said most of the people the communists counted on to further their work were not official members of the Communist Party. But I am certain, as I can be, that he, MLK, knew what he was doing. And I am just as certain that the drive to glorify him is just as much a communist project as anything else.
Well, I say it is frightening, and it should be frightened to the entire American people that he has demanded $10 billion. And if he doesn't get it, then there may be riots this summer. Martin Luther King is nothing but a blackmailer, and he should be arrested for blackmailing because he certainly has blackmailed the United States government.
There's one thing that bothers me, and that as a Negro yourself, why do you talk so bitterly against Martin Luther King and a lot of these other people of your race?
Well, let me tell you something. I don't put my race before I do my country. Being a Negro woman doesn't matter to me who is a Negro or who is a white person. If they are enemies of our country, then they are certainly my enemies too.
And now, at least for a time, we must suffer the frustration of a national holiday named in honor of a man who was a liar, a traitor, a tool of communism, and a man about whom secrets must be sealed in a vault for 50 years. To keep the truth about him being fully known, Martin Luther King said he had a dream. A real American who had the kind of dream he had would call it a nightmare. Today, one of King's lieutenants is on the loose, Jesse Jackson.
Now, the plot to glorify him. Well, that plot worked very, very well. Very, very well. I mean, they glorified, you can't talk about Jesus Christ in school, but you can show enough talk about Martin Luther King Jr. You can't talk about the Bible, but you can show enough talk about his I Have a Dream speech, his letter from the Birmingham jail. You can't talk about the trek of Christianity from Christ to now, but you can show enough talk about the Civil Rights Trail and the Civil Rights Museums and all that kind of stuff. Oh, you can talk about all that to our children. Yeah. Indoctrination. All a lie. A movement led by a bunch of perverts and liars and hypocrites and anti-Christian bigots. And let me prove it. People say, what's wrong with being a communist? See, you young people now don't understand communism like we understood it growing up during the Cold War. We knew that the communists had thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at us every day. Press of a button, we're all dead. So we had this thing called mutually assured destruction, MAD, where if they shot theirs, we shot ours, and we destroyed each other's countries, just like that. And we lived under that fear as children until Ronald Reagan broke them, and the Berlin Wall came down in 1990. But the communists had goals, and they weren't finished. So they weren't finished after the Berlin Wall fell. They just morphed into something else. Just like Voldemort in Harry Potter, he always just goes into something else. Well, that's what these jokers did. So instead of being the communists, they just went to the Democratic Party. All the members of the Communist Party just went into the Democratic Party here in America. And they said, we're going to turn this party into the Communist Party. Now,